I Believe in Emma, Part 3. It's amazing the rare times when active Mormons and anti-Mormons agree on something. The faces seen here under active Mormons and under anti-Mormons represent a small sampling of what exists. There's just not enough space to include them all. However, the fundamental beliefs of each group is well represented by those you see here. In this video, you will see a few times when the active Mormons and the anti-Mormons come together. Let's begin. Stage left. These active Mormons are popular podcasters and book writers. The two things these active Mormons have in common is they believe the church's narrative as written in the Saints, the Standard of Truth, and Section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants. As their faces and names appear, most of you will probably already know them. Or if you're interested in learning more about someone you see here, do a search. So here they are, the sample of active Mormons who believe Joseph Smith was a polygamist based on the church's narrative and Section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Now let's take a quick look at the sample of anti-Mormons. You may also recognize some of these faces and names. Greg Mattson, however, is an active Mormon we'll hear from shortly. So, the active Mormons and the anti-Mormons agree here. They both believe Joseph Smith was a polygamist. Now let's bring in the church's history book, Saints, the Standard of Truth. Joseph sometimes chose to marry women without Emma's knowledge. Again, I believe both active Mormons and anti-Mormons agree that happened. However, they do not agree on why this happened. For many of the anti-Mormons, the answer is simple. Joseph Smith was a sexual predator. He was a cheating, lying adulterer, and if you believe that he married 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball, he is, in the modern vernacular, a pedophile. He was a serial adulterer, as the statement by the church claims he married women, not just one woman. Now for the active Mormon, the church's claim is a tough one to defend. Just ask an active Mormon, how do you feel about Joseph cheating multiple times on his wife Emma? And see how they respond. Then after their response, which will most likely be an awkward, pathetic defense of godly adultery, quote for them Doctrine and Covenants, section 42, verses 22, which reads, "Thou shalt love thy wife with all of thy heart, and shalt cleave unto her, and none else." In reply, the active Mormon you just quoted to will probably provide another awkward, pathetic response like, "Yes, you must cleave unto your wife and none else unless God's prophet says otherwise." Now, focusing on the anti-Mormons, they could care less about the Doctrine and Covenants. To them, it's not Scripture. They believe Joseph Smith wrote it. Think about that. They believe Joseph wrote it. So the question then to ask an anti-Mormon is, why would Joseph write, "Thou shalt love thy wife with all thy heart, and shalt cleave unto her and none else," if you believe he is a lying, cheating, sexual predator? What would be his motive to write such a thing? If Joseph is the evil, deceiving book writer of the Doctrine and Covenants you claim, wouldn't he be better off creating pro-positive polygamy verses and placing them strategically throughout the Doctrine and Covenants? What kind of precedent does this set?
I mean, you can argue about what Joseph said. It's pretty clear Joseph, if he was practicing plural marriage, was lying to some extent when he said he wasn't. Now, you could say it's a prudent lie. Does this dress make me look fat? There are times when the truth is not the best policy.
Right. Well, did Joseph lie or did Brigham lie, right?
Well,
and it's like, well, okay, Joseph did.
Yeah.
So
he did.
2 Nephi 28, verse 8. And there shall also be many which shall say, Eat, drink, and be merry. Nevertheless, fear God. He will justify in committing a little sin, yea, lie a little. 2 Nephi 9, verse 34. Woe unto the liar, for he shall be thrust down to hell. On May 8th, 2026, I listened to a recording of this audio podcast titled, He Lied. Top Mormon apologist concedes Joseph Smith lied about polygamy, that being Jacob Hansen. During the podcast, Jacob Hansen states, if the Nazis come and knock on your door and ask you if you're hiding any Jews, you can say no. That's a tough one. Jacob Hansen here is providing an extreme scenario to justify bearing false witness. I think most of us at the spiritual state we are currently in would agree with him. The question, however, we should ask is, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus lie? Of course not. He might just stand there silently and not answer the question like when he was placed before King Herod. Jesus' position to truth and honesty was and is greater than the fear of torture and death. Think of the people of Ammon in the Book of Mormon, known also as the anti-Nephi Lehi's, who entered into a covenant with God that they would not take up arms against the Lamanites, even to the point of their destruction. So the question really comes back to us individually. Is my spiritual connection to God strong enough to be like the people of Ammon, or more importantly, to be like Jesus? We can also ask ourselves, do I have the faith and power to call down divine intervention in such a scenario? Jacob Hansen's answer to his own scenario to me is more of a reflection of where he is at spiritually. There are consequences to bearing false witness no matter how we decide to rationalize it. This quote comes from the diary of Leonard Arrington, who at the time was the LDS Church historian. They don't have any qualms about lying to get temple recommends or to go on missions because, quote, the prophet Joseph lied about polygamy in Nauvoo, unquote. Leonard is responding to several LDS teenage boys who learned about lies associated with polygamy from their seminary teacher of all people. When these young men turned 19 and interviewed to go to the temple, they thought it was okay to lie because Joseph did. Warren Jeffs in 2002 was sustained as president and prophet, seer, and revelator, as well as president of the priesthood of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I believe the Active Mormons and the Anti-Mormons agree. Warren Jeffs was a polygamist, a sexual predator, a convicted pedophile, and an evil man. Yet sadly, there are women today who still believe Warren Jeffs is a living prophet of God. So where does the Fundamentalist Church and its prophet claim its authority? It comes from the 1886 Visitations of Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith to the prophet John Taylor. This book contains a copy of the revelation President Taylor received from their visit. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has for over 93 years publicly denied its existence until last year. LDS Church finally publishes a polygamy revelation it insisted for years didn't exist. The Salt Lake Tribune, June 17, 2025. On June 17, 1933, the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints published an official statement in the Deseret News denying the existence of the John Taylor revelation. Here is a portion of that public statement.
As to this pretended revelation, it should be said that the archives of the Church contain no such revelation. The archives contain no record of any such revelation, nor any evidence justifying a belief that any such revelation was ever given. From the personal knowledge of some of us, from the uniform and common recollection of the presiding quorums of the Church, from the absence in the Church archives of any evidence whatsoever justifying any belief that such a revelation was given, we are justified in affirming that no such revelation exists.
Just another little prudent lie hidden for almost 100 years? Yet the unanswered question is, why did the LDS Church last year quietly publish this polygamy revelation without any explanation? It was determined by this revelation that the new and everlasting covenant had not been revoked by the Lord, and because of that, polygamy must remain actively practiced on the earth for those who will enter into his glory. To accomplish this, John Taylor set up secret priesthood lines of authority that are known as fundamentalists. After John Taylor passed away, Wilford Woodruff took over the leadership of the LDS Church. He issued the 1890 Manifesto, which was the beginning of the end for the practice of polygamy in the church. John W. Woolley is uncle to Spencer W. Kimball and Lauren C. Woolley, a first cousin. Interesting. Enter now President Brigham Young with his 2 legal wives and 54 concubines. Do you think the anti-Mormons would view Brigham Young and all of his wives any differently than how they viewed Warren Jeffs and all of his wives? I don't think so. To them, both Brigham and Warren are both sexual predators. 10 of the women Brigham married were teenagers at the time. The 5 pictured here were under the age of 18. Now let's turn to perhaps the most decisive verse of Scripture ever written condemning plural marriage, found in the Book of Mormon, Jacob chapter 2, verse 27. Wherefore, my brethren, hear me, and hearken to the word of the Lord. For there shall not any man among you have save it be one wife, and concubines he shall have none. The Active Mormons, however, embrace Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, which makes the verse just read null and void whenever the living prophet says so. Now, a question for the anti-Mormons. Why would Joseph Smith write such a verse? If Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon as you anti-Mormons believe, why on earth would he write such a scripture? Why would he write such a powerful condemnation of the lifestyle you believe he lived? That being that Joseph was a lying, cheating sexual predator. What would be his motive to write such a thing? Again, if Joseph is the author and creator of the Book of Mormon scripture, wouldn't he be better off creating positive pro-polygamy verses instead? Okay, back to just the Active Mormons, and let's bring in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132. But first, let's read this quote by the prophet Joseph Smith. I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion, and a man would get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than any other book. So, you Active Mormons, do you believe Joseph when he said that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth? Do you believe that the Book of Mormon is more correct than the Doctrine and Covenants? Let's compare. Let's first read from the Book of Mormon, Jacob 2, verse 24. Behold, David and Solomon truly had many wives and concubines, which thing was abominable before me, saith the Lord. Now let's read Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, verses 38 and part of 39. David also received many wives and concubines, and also Solomon and Moses my servants, from the beginning of creation until this time, and in nothing did they sin save in those things which they received not of me. David's wives and concubines were given unto him of me, and in none of these things did he sin against me, save in the case of Uriah and his wife. Both the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants here are in direct opposition. Both cannot be true. The Book of Mormon tells us that David had many wives and concubines, which thing was abominable before the Lord. The Doctrine and Covenants tells us that, and in none of these things did he sin against me, save in the case of Uriah and his wife. One wife. Unbelievable. I believe the Book of Mormon's account. There's no question of Joseph Smith's connection to the Book of Mormon. However, there are no first-hand accounts by Joseph Smith himself that he is the author or had anything to do with Section 132. Even so, the Book of Mormon trumps the Doctrine and Covenants as being the most correct book. To me, Section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants is the 1876 version of Mark Hoffman. This, to me, is a very disturbing photo. It shows 57-year-old Lorenzo Snow pictured next to his 15-year-old wife, Sarah Jensen. Sarah was wife number 9, and they would have 5 children together. This scenario could never happen today because someone in this photo would be going to jail. Recently, Netflix aired a documentary miniseries called Trust Me, the False Prophet, exposing disturbing evidence about Samuel Bateman, who claims to be the successor to Warren Jeffs. Dr. Benjamin Park responded to the Netflix series with a podcast of his own titled Fundamentalist Expert Analysis of the Series. Dr. Park had Dr. Christina Galliola as a guest on his April 22nd podcast. In this short video clip, Christina responds to a scene in the Netflix series where the faces of some of these young girl victims were not hidden properly.
Instead of blurring faces, the documentary makers chose to re-digitize the faces, and there have been numerous concerns raised that the faces were not altered enough, even for minors, that they are recognizable. And this is a concern because minors are unable to consent to anything, to anything, to anything.
To anything, to anything, to anything. In a future video, I will discuss the lives of some of Brigham's concubines. Here is a quick sample. Emmeline Free was recognized as an elegant and lovely lady. Brigham was proud of her beauty and took great pleasure in introducing her to visitors and dancing with her at parties. They had 10 children together. She was known as the pride of the harem until Brigham Young married Amelia Folsom 18 years later. Then Amelia became his favorite. However, still on the prowl, Brigham married Mary Van Cott 5 years later. Amelia was not happy. But apparently not satisfied, Brigham married Annalisa Webb 3 months later. Anne was born in Nauvoo in September 1844. All she knew growing up was the culture and control of Mormonism. When Brigham Young approached her father, Chauncey Webb, and wanted to take his daughter for a wife, he had no problem. However, Anne wanted nothing to do with it. She wept and wept and wept. Anne's mother asked, "What is the problem, dear? He is the prophet." Eventually, she married under pressure, but later divorced him, wrote a book, and went on a national speaking tour exposing the crimes of polygamy. I thought, what if polygamy was reversed? What if women were the stronger sex and decided who would marry whom? So I took my wedding photo and replaced my bride's face with what you see here. I'm not against old folks because now I am one myself. However, doing this helped me to visualize and caused me to appreciate more the sufferings of so many young girls forced into polygamy. The message, keep sweet, pray, and obey, was ingrained into the lives of these polygamous women. Not surprising, Brigham Young had a similar message. Let's listen to what he had to say on August 9th, 1874, in the city of Lehi, as recorded in the Journal of Discourse.
You sisters may say that plural marriage is very hard for you to bear. It is no such thing. If it is the duty of a husband to take a wife, take her. But it is not the privilege of a woman to dictate the husband and tell who or how many he shall take, or what he shall do with them when he gets them. But it is the duty of the woman to submit cheerfully.
Submit cheerfully. Wow, look at the similarity of these two messages. Scary. Finally, and this is amazing, what a coincidence that both abused polygamous women 130 years apart each identified themselves as wife number 19. Annalisa, remember her? She cried and didn't want to marry Brigham. She was able to divorce him and subsequently traveled the United States and spoke out against polygamy and Brigham Young. She testified before the U.S. Congress on April 14, 1877. A couple months later, the Poland Act was signed into law, which reorganized the judicial system of the Utah Territory and facilitated the federal prosecution of LDS Church polygamists. In a biographical entry on Brigham Young in the American National Biography, Leonard Arrington stated that Annalisa's lectures against Young were influential in the federal anti-polygamy legislation of 1882 and 1887. Rebecca Muser testified against Warren Jeffs a total of 20 times and helped prosecutors to win 11 convictions against him. I recommend you Google search Rebecca and watch some of her interviews. She is amazing. Thank you for watching. Part 4, We Believe Emma, coming soon.